Okay, hi everyone. Once again, this is the week 6 podcast for Group 3, National and State Control. We'll start with the first question. How do federal and state governments exercise control of education? Discuss the similarities and differences as well as the advantages and disadvantages. All right, Sarah?
Just to get started, the first thing I thought of was testing. To my understanding, that's how they measure funding and everything that goes with it. On all levels, of course. And then I've never seen any official in any of my school districts or anything like that. So it's not even like I've seen them come in to check on things or anything like that. They just kind of, from my experience and how I understand it, is they kind of just compare numbers in the testing and then, go from there, which I don't think there's an advantage to that, because I think this goes back to what we've talked about in previous podcasts, is how not all schools are treated equally, if we will. We're not given the same resources considering the location. And of course, that's almost like a double-edged sword. Like, they don't have a lot of resources because they have low scores, but they have low scores because they don't have a lot of resources. So it's very kind of like a tug of war there, and nobody's really winning. So that's just what I thought of. First question was, that's how they exercise control of, like, hey, we'll give you money. What are you going to do with it? And if you don't do what we think you're going to do with our money, we're going to give it to somebody else who will. And that seems to be measured by testing and scores and things of that nature. Just what I thought.
Well, okay. I hear what you're saying. I think the federal government, they are saying basically, if you take our money, you have to do this, right? So it's not like they're just going to give you money and then you get to decide what you're going to do with it. They're saying, if we give it to you, you have to do these tests, you have to submit this data, you have to do this, 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 and this. So there's something tied to their money. So it's not just, here's money, you guys know what to do best with it because you're the local community. It is, no, this is what we want. This is what you must do if you receive federal funds. Same thing with like laws. They have to follow specific laws if you accept federal money. So I think that's how the federal government kind of got control over public schools, because it didn't used to be like that, right? When there was no federal Department of Education, right? Each state did their own thing. And so the states kind of had control over that because they're the ones giving them funding. And then the local school boards probably put a lot more of the day-to-day kind of stuff control, right? Because, they're in the community, they should know, more of what's going on in the small community. At least I think that, the advantage of being more school board run or more locally run is they know what's going on in that community. Because again, every community, every town, every city is different. So their needs are different than, a small one, right? A rural town compared to a big city, they're going to have way different needs, right? So what is the federal government, like what common things do they have compared to, a big city and a town, right? I don't know. So that's why I like small. I think the community state should have more authority over the public schools than the federal government. They just usually mess stuff up anyways, but sorry.
Yeah, I agreed with that, Nick. And I also was like, I don't want to like reiterate what you guys were saying, because funding and that stuff was a big thing that I looked at here. But if like I started thinking more, if we can identify that, like, we can see that the schools that are struggling aren't receiving that funding when they need that funding, if we can identify it, not being those people deciding this, like, why aren't they helping them? Like, don't they want those schools and those children to succeed? But like, if we can identify it, somebody that's controlling this has to be able to identify it too. So like, why aren't they helping these schools? Like, yes, they're struggling, but like, they're struggling because they don't have that funding.
Yeah, I always thought that was like so ironic how they named No Child Left Behind what they did, when to my understanding back then was, if you don't perform well on these tests, you're penalized by you're not going to get funding. And it's like, well, if this school is struggling, then don't you think they need some kind of resources to help, get them close that gap. So yeah, that was, I always hated that they called it that because it was just so blatantly leaving children behind. So yeah, I mean, I guess when it comes to funding, it is mostly funded through local taxes and state taxes. I know, like from last week's paper when I was looking up, the two different schools, like and obviously those are charters, but I was looking at them side by side with public schools, and they did that sort of financial breakdown, and it was almost I mean, at least in Pennsylvania, I guess it was almost completely locally funded. But when I was sort of researching for this week's paper, I was seeing it was a little bit more of a sort of plurality between state and state and local funding. Sort of, they were both coming in with like basically like 40% or 45% each, and then the remaining 10% was federal, which I guess it started at like 2% back with the in the Johnson administration. But it was still, even 2% of a school's budget is significant. So that was the kind of the incentive that sort of led to that program, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, to sort of the success that it had. So I was kind of looking at, I was really trying to pick apart all the things because it's just so twisted and almost web-like, but that goes along with the whole sort of foundational structure of our government with checks and balances, like, the legislative branch writes laws, the executive branch, carries them out, and then the judicial branch sort of helps define define jurisdictions where appropriate. So it's been, really interesting seeing how these things all go in. But I do think, it's a matter of the local communities knowing. I mean, because when you say, okay, the federal government's going to oversee all this, and it really is just coming to them as numerical data. It's not coming to them as, specific kids, teachers, school administrators, and it's hard to say that you're considering specific people when it's coming like that. So it really does need to be coordinated, across the two, because like we've all been learning about, especially during the civil rights era, when the stuff was all kind of coming down, where schools were just, or states and districts were kind of doing what they wanted, and it was discriminatory and predatory. I mean, reading about all this stuff, even like long before that turn of the century, it was like almost, I mean, it was like internment. So it's good that the federal government has the power to oversee it, to make sure that nobody's being taken advantage of. And I guess, having, testing give them data to see, to see that things are being maintained is good. But yeah, I mean, it's just such a thing where the closer you are to the kids, the better you are at addressing what they need.
Yeah, they're going for that one size fits matter. Like, they're just putting everybody under the same category, especially with these high stake testings. Like,
yeah,
everybody's taking the same test no matter what ability or education level you're on.
Do you guys think that like a national standard educationally is beneficial though? I mean, I think that on some level it is good for them to be able to maintain that.
I agree. I think that giving everyone at least a level playing field that way is fair, so that this way, especially if like they have to transfer, or you know what I mean, like I think it's beneficial for them that way. But just like, Peyton was saying, that they're given the same test regardless of ability. That kind of is a little hard to justify, because then your scores are skewed, but you had nothing, there's nothing you can do about it. There's no, other kind of assessment to take or to give them. So if they don't get it, they should have resources or accommodation and all of those things, but that's not always available.
Yeah, it's kind of like, they want to be able to use these tests to assess and identify inequality, but the tests themselves are not fair.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess that's a good segue for the next question of the controlling entity of standardized testing. We did touch on that. What are the advantages and disadvantages of standardized testing? Since we're kind of already on that topic.
I'm not a fan. Sorry to cut you off a little bit, Nick, but I just first thing from even from a teacher's perspective, I don't like it. So for the simple reason of I have to we have pacing guides and stuff, at least at my school we do, to where we're making, because we have to make sure we're on enough time to get to May or whenever we take the standardized test, the PSSAs, whatever it is, Terra Novas. And sometimes, whether my kids get it or not, I got to keep moving. You know what I mean? I can't stop, because if I stop and hold back, for example, the other week we were learning about the number line and how to add and subtract, multiply and divide integers. And some of my kids got upset with me because I didn't keep going with it. I had to move on to the next thing. And it hurt me to know that I was kind of doing them a disservice that way. But at the same time, they need to know so much by May. And they're already so behind from COVID and even, whatever that brought. And even, I don't know where they fell before that. They might have even been low before that. But there's so much pressure for both teachers and students to do well and to get enough done in time to be, considered at all. So I'm team no test. But the advantage is, I guess, is to see if there's growth over the years. I guess I just wish that the emphasis on the test wasn't so heavy. Because I give tests throughout the school year to see if they've grasped it, and I might sprinkle in the things that they don't get in the later on lessons as a do now entry thing. But otherwise I can't go back until May or June, when it may not even matter, and they're done. Everyone's done. By May or June, the tests are done, grades are in, forget it. So no one wants to do it anymore. But I understand, their mindset behind it of okay, just like Nick was saying earlier, we've given them funding. Are they using the resources to do well enough, to score well enough on these tests, whatever their measurement is, to be sure that we're using the funding appropriately. So it's not really fair all around. That's just my opinion. Of course, there might be some people like I know some parents that actually sign documents that their children don't have to take them because they don't necessarily matter in grade school, middle school.
Yeah, I guess that was a ESSA thing, right? It was allowing for opt-outs.
Mm-hmm. So, and I never give a hard time. I'm just please, I wish I could give one to every one of my students sometimes, but some parents want them to be tested, I guess, to see where they are, how they're doing, but it's such a heavy test with so much on the line. And they're well aware of that. That's always we have to do well on the PSSAs. You have to do well. Good luck. Or, you can bring a blanket with you. You can bring a pillow and fall asleep when you're done, but get it done well. Da, 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 da. And as teachers, we're are you following the pacing guide? How are the, so it's just, it's a lot. It's a lot.
I think testing is, I don't think it's testing necessarily that is the problem. I think it's the emphasis and the high stakes part of it that can kind of cause it, because testing, if they use it correctly, I think could be beneficial, right? It holds people accountable. It definitely shows progress and all that kind of stuff, right? It can show where students are, especially compared, state by state, right? Even community by community, whatever it is. That doesn't necessarily mean you need to, put funding attached to it necessarily. or like graduation rates and all that kind of stuff. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to reason, I think that did the Keystones or something in Pennsylvania where you had to pass to graduate high school, right?
Mm.
Those, I don't know. I can understand where they want to have like a set standard to graduate, but there's so much more to school than just taking one test that kind of has the whole, that like decides whether you graduate or not. Because again, you've had 12 years of schooling, like you made it to 12th grade. Teachers give grades as well, and everybody's a little bit different. So it's, does one test really matter in the whole grand scheme of things? Maybe, maybe not. But I think tests are fine as long as you use them correctly. And I think using them as accountability, as, seeing, improvement or whatever, wherever they are, and being able to compare like state by state and that kind of stuff, I think they're beneficial. But again, it's when the high stakes part comes in that I can disagree on the way they go about it, especially like, I know it's a lot of classroom teachers in elementary school. It's kind of like everybody is on this lesson and everybody's on the next lesson and everybody's on the next lesson. And they give you scripts of exactly what to say because we have to get through this lesson to get to the next lesson to make sure we get everything done before the tests come. And that kind of takes away the creativity of the teacher. Again, you have a different class every year. So every class is going to be different. So you can't necessarily do the same thing to reach everybody. So it's harder to differentiate, I feel like, when you have that rote script that they hand out and all that kind of stuff. So again, tests are fine as long as I think they're used appropriately, but that's my opinion. So.
Yeah, I agree with both of you guys. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. It wasn't purple, but yeah, I agree with both of you guys. And I kind of looked at it too, like personally, like when it came to the PSSAs, SATs, ACTs, those things, I struggled so bad on those. And I never understood because in school I was in honors classes, I had A's, like I was always so good at school. But when it came to those high stake tests, I stressed myself out. I got so anxious because it was like, if I don't do well here, I can't get into this school or I can't go to this school. So I feel like that pressure that they do put on you, especially in high school, is so hard. And like you're already going through a big transition from going to high school to college, that like you're putting this emphasis on these tests to determine where kids go. And like I watched a documentary on that like whole college scandal thing and the test scores and all that, and like these kids put everything into doing well on these SAT scores, and the ones that try and they don't get those results on the scores, like that's their future that it's determining. So it's like, how can you do that to a child in a way, like put all that pressure and their future kind of on the line?
Yeah, I mean, when you don't perform well on the test, I mean, at my high school they made us take SATs sophomore, junior, and senior year, and my sophomore year I didn't have a good attitude any year of high school. So my sophomore year SAT was garbage, and I was just like, what's the point of this? I'm not going to ever, it's kind of like I'm worthless. It's like everybody's saying, oh, I got this, I got that. And I'm like, well, duh, maybe I should have taken my finger out of my nose for 10 minutes. But, it's pressure and it affects your self-esteem. I think having so much ride on, I could see when it's like, medical school, what do they call LSATs?
Yeah.
Or
the bar exam.
or bar exams. It's like you got to know it. You got to know this stuff. You can't be going in there like, on the fly. You got to know it. But yeah, for like for a fifth grader, for a sophomore in high school, for a senior in high school, and to have everything, so much riding on it is a disservice to education. One kind of side note, interesting fact that I found out, because I was just like, well, what's the history of standardized testing? Did you guys look into that? Han Dynasty, 2,000 years ago, they started doing it. And it obviously, it hasn't been implemented throughout that whole time, but I was so surprised to see that that it has that kind of a history. Yeah, I guess I could see the value of, I mean, our country is 300 and something million people, there's 75 million kids in school. For any kind of top down, kind of keeping track of that is completely impossible, kind of back to the first question. So it's like a, an efficient way to sort of get the data that they need to assess things as a whole, and try to figure out, ways to coordinate with different states or different communities that need the help. So yeah, there's definitely some, statistical benefit to it. And, maybe you can kind of develop good study habits and organizational skills while you're preparing for it. But to have everything riding on it is unfair. Like, Sarah said, with, students that don't learn the same way, or students that have a language barrier, or where there's certain students that can go into, have tutoring and have like after school help consistently to prepare them. There's going to be people that are, at a disadvantage, and it's definitely not fair. Having them affect teachers' actual job stability is super unfair. So many things contribute to education and learning. So yeah, I mean, there's pros and cons, but the cons are significant, and they are kind of like, they really affect people's lives, and that's why I'm with you guys. Long story short.
I do like that you brought up like the LSATs and the bar exam though, because we do take, adults do take tests to get certified, get licensed for things. So they do have, there's purpose and there's meaningfulness to test, especially like even when you're 16, right? You get a driver's license.
Yeah.
You can take a test to like show that they're good enough to get on the road and, be safe. So I do see validity in them. It's just the high stakes part and the certain aspects of that high stakes, especially like, teachers getting graded on that, their salaries, depending on that, schools, resources, funding, depending on that, kids graduating high school necessarily, right, on one test. So there's just the way you use tests. I don't think it's the test that's the problem. It's the way that's used, the appropriateness of it. So.
And just
also,
how young.
Up the DMV and driver's license tests. Can we just talk about how if you get a driver's license at 16 and you're 90, like how much different is the driving experience? How much has the driving experience changed in those 75 years? The fact that you only have to do it once is crazy. And also, every state's different. Sometimes city by city, it's different. Right. So to not know the laws, just be like, no, there was, when I started driving, we had to talk to the operator to make phone calls. Like, it's crazy. And I don't think there's ever going to be a politician that can be like, we need to have everybody take driver's tests more. Like, nobody's going to support it, but it makes sense. It does.
Well, okay. I was gonna say, because if you have a driver's license, then you continue to drive. You kind of hone those skills, just like a doctor, true. Right? I don't know. They get their doctor medical degree, and then they continue to do surgeries.
I see a lot of people driving, and I'm like, how is this?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be allowed to do that.
I just feel like, though, just to bring it back, just listening to that too, is just like, I feel like the issue is because like with driving with your driver's license, like you either get your driver's license or you fail. Like with taking the bar and like that stuff, like you're either going to be a lawyer or you're going to fail. You're either going to be a doctor or you're going to fail. But with high stake testings, there's so many things that could happen or like go wrong or go right. Like you can either do really well and then it opens a whole nother can of worms, or you could do really bad and then it could be like you don't graduate, you don't advance to the next grade level. Like consequences outside of school, things like that. So it's like too wide and leaves so many open questions.
Mhm.
Peyton, to kind of piggyback off of that too, another thing that I consider about like the driving and everything is how young they start these tests. You take your driver's license test and you're, 16, what have you. You take the bar or the LSATs or the MCATs or whatever it is, even teachers taking their certification test, like anything like that, you've made that choice to take that test. You know what, is kind of on the line that we keep kind of referring to. Like you've chosen that path for yourself. You know that you have to study, and you probably couldn't have gotten to that test if you didn't do well in your classes up until that point. So you're probably, smarter than others, and you kind of are aware of that or not, whatever. But these children, unless their parents say that they don't have to, they have to. And what if their parents think that they should? But they're horrible test takers and they have the worst test anxiety. Like I've had kids break down and just it's so as they're taking the test, they're like crying. And I'm like, I can't even watch this. So, you know what I mean? So like that was the other thing I kind of thought of with like the driver's test and all of those official certification tests is that you've chosen that for yourself. And I know you're on the teenage side of things, but still you've been able to the ways, the pros and cons of like, hey, it's not always the safest choice to take your driver's test. And, you've practiced driving like, whoa, maybe I'm not ready, what have you. So that was another thing, how young they start. And they didn't choose that for themselves either. Their parents might be like, no, that's great. I'm sorry, but you're doing it. And that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, I mean, it's well, let's see, let's just for time's sake, because we are at 5:30. You guys want to move on to question 3? What is the relationship between mandated standardized tests and equity of opportunity? And I think we did touch on this. There's obvious inequities, and I think there was one thing that I was reading. There was, a group that was very critical of the opt-out, saying this is the people that need, to be have needs addressed, are going to be just opting out. They're just be like, I'm not going to do very well, so I'm not doing it. And so that data never kind of goes anywhere, or that never even becomes data, and they're not able to address it. I know that, yeah, I mean, I think we really did cover it. It's kind of hard to just backtrack and say something new. It definitely, I think, doesn't do what it needs to do in terms of providing equity.
Yeah, because like Peyton said earlier, was like, it's not one size fits all. We don't all get the same amount of funding to start with. It's not like, hey, we're all given this amount. Or maybe we are, but I wasn't made aware of anything like that. I've been told that funding and testing scores are have a very strong relationship. So for me, I think that, I said earlier, it's a double-edged sword. If they don't do well, they don't get enough funding, and then it circles back and back and back. Whereas the schools that get more funding because their scores are higher. Another thing is location. We don't know what these kids go home to, if they have anyone to help them with their homework or, along the way to even feel prepared for a test or practice the math, whether that be homework, something as small as homework. And now you're looking at something as heavy as this standardized test, and they just flunk. They do terribly because they don't have not even resources from funding, but at home they might not have the money like suburban schools do, where they have tutors and all of those extra things where the parents really put time and money into their children. So all federal, state aside, it's something as small as their own home is different across the board. But they're expected to know the same things.
Yeah. Also, I was just thinking, like, there's inequities just with the physical schools themselves. So you imagine, a kid going to take these tests at a nice, school, it's calm, it's clean, it's bright, and then go into a school that's got, tiles on the ceiling missing and, lights not functioning and, loud noises happening everywhere. I can only imagine that adds to the stress and, can't, create a very good, a very good
like learning environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even just going back to like, I feel like there will never really be an equity of opportunity too if there's no, I guess like, I don't know if it's not really emphasized with children with other abilities too, because like I'm pretty sure don't students with IEP still take like PSSAs, but they just maybe get extended time or like they take them with their aides. But like I don't know, that's
Enough.
inequality to me. Like it's just not, it's not, they're not benefiting from it in any way, like unless their parent exempts them. And like maybe parents don't even know that they can exempt their kids, because like I
Yeah.
didn't even know that you could exempt your kids from those tests. And like, yeah, so I don't know, I just feel like there's always going to be that inequality if it's not made for those kids with the different abilities or IEPs, and like, or made more aware that they don't have to take these tests because it's not doing anything.
Yeah, kind of what you were saying. Every school is not the same, so I don't know. You can't expect the same results, I guess. And like again, every student is different. And you said you get extra time if you have an IEP or this or that. They have some tools that they can use, but that's why again I think it's the high stakes part is the wrong with the test, because even if you have an IEP and you get extended time, right, it still kind of gives you a progress bar of like where you were, where you've been, and kind of where you compare and see like are these tools actually helping with their academics and that kind of stuff. So I can see how that would be helpful in that way, but again, the high stakes part where they don't move on to the next grade or something like that is where the problem is. And again, taking them every year is kind of silly too, if you ask me, but maybe like 3rd, 5th, 8th, and 10th or something, like twice in elementary school, one in middle school, one in high school kind of thing. But
Do you guys think now, obviously COVID highlighted certain inequities, right? And I'm not sure that exactly a standardized test can kind of compile that data to help find a solution. But do you think, what kind of systems are in place if not, some sort of like raw data collection thing like a standardized test? It can't just be surveys, like that would be impossible to make sense of, so there's got to be like, so that stuff obviously needs to be addressed. That just happened. And I think we're all in agreement that standardized tests create stress. They ignore inequity, sometimes even kind of create new inequity. But in this case, there's an inequity, and I guess it's a lot of it is technology.
Yes. So you said like, how can the standardized tests help, like in COVID, like after the COVID kind of situation? They can kind of show
like a standardized test like thing, like, because I just think of a standardized test as really just, it's kind of just data collection, So that's where I see like it's not education, it's data collection. It's a way for like to get a national picture of the of where we're standing right now. But we need to be able to address certain things. So is there another data collection method that could be used in that case?
Kind of like what Nick said, is the first thing I think of is like, you can have a test, you can measure their abilities, and but don't just have one test for everybody. Have one test be for those that are on this, maybe the autism spectrum, who need more time or a different or whatever it is, more manipulatives, put their hands on it, whatever it is. Make sure it is aligns with their IEP requirements and things like that too. So just like different versions of the test would be cool. Not putting so much on the line would be awesome. Kind of like what Nick said, like it's not the test that's the problem. It's so much pressure that's added to it. As I said, again, like what we always go back to of like the line that's kind of drawn around it. And yeah, so I just think a test is fine as long as you're really being equitable in the way that you kind of give it to the school districts, schools, communities, however you want to go about it, states, etc. Where it comes from is another thing, kind of like what we talked about. The federal government should kind of monitor, not necessarily be in control of, just make sure everyone's kind of being fair, so that one state can't go over on another state and all that other kind of stuff. We're all playing fairly. But it's just a matter of different versions of the test. If, maybe give a written version, you can grade it with this. I just graded a Scantron test with like just a snapshot of a picture. I just held it in front of a camera and it graded it, but the kid was able to write. So I just think a test is fine. Don't add so much to it.
But then you get into the place where you have 50 different states that are all controlling their own testing. They're all saying these tests are what we have available. That there's no alternative. If a state is going to specifically not address that, then should the federal government make them? If a state's just going to be like, nope, no test for you. Too bad about that, learning disability you have, or too bad about your, home language, or or too bad about being blind. Like there's going to be a lot of disabilities that are going to impair your ability to take the test. That if it's just left up to if there is no standard. So it's kind of, it really complicates things. It's all very complicated. It's like spaghetti, it's like, where's the end of that noodle? Now I'm lost.
This kind of makes me think of last week's conversation of like the Western model. Do other countries have high stake testing, or is it just something that we do? Does anybody know?
I don't know.
I think that it's pretty global.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's how we're able to say, like, we're behind. That's where, in the 80s when they did that Nation at Risk, they're like, our scores are behind China's, we're losing. Our scores are behind Russia, we're losing. I know that, like I said before, it was the first standardized tests were in, ancient times in China, and then they weren't really brought back until like the mid 1800s or something like that in India, in British colonial India. So it spread through Europe at that time, and they were widely used everywhere around the turn of the century. So I think they have been implemented globally, but I don't know too many specifics. We are running out of time, so if anybody has any closing thoughts or anything like that.
Two quick things.
Okay.
Because you were talking about, I didn't get in there, but when you're saying like the standardized tests are data, and after COVID, I think it was good data because each state kind of did their own thing on lockdowns and what they did with public schools. So you can see what worked, what didn't. I think everybody can realize now in-person schooling is very, very important, right? Because a lot of school tests fell down. So I think like that it has a good purpose for that, right? It showed us what doesn't work, right? So because of all the different things that people tried in COVID. And the other thing, you said like, what if one state does this and one state does that? But if that's what like is good about like federalism, like each state can do their own thing. And if one state sees that the other state is doing something really well, sometimes they start copying that, you know what I mean? So it's kind of like they see something successful and then they go from there. Where if you see something that's not working, then you go away from that, right? At least that's the way, you would expect people to do it. Sometimes it's political, but again, the states with having the different opportunities to do other things, you have more chances to do the right thing or get better in academics kind of thing. Kind of like charters, right? Charters open to do different like academic philosophies. Like same thing with states. States can do different testing, and if one state does a really good job and people are seeing progress like with academics, they might go, oh wow, that's great, instead of the federal government saying everybody does this. how are
Right.
we going to know what's better or worse? You know, because we just have one.
Yeah, I mean, I just think I think the reason that I was on that track was just because, like, if certain states are effective with it and then other states aren't, and then you can't just be like, you got to fix it, you know, like you got to do something, you know, like if there's no way to, like, outside of just gentle nudging or like, look at your friend, you know,
Yeah,
it's
but
like,
that's why, like, you vote, right? Voting
Yeah.
matters now, right? You have to vote them out, right? If the politicians aren't putting the right thing in, you vote them out. Like, isn't school board? There's elections. The school board. If people aren't happy with what the school board's doing, they vote them out. I mean, people have to pay attention, but you know, that's kind of what the voting process is for.
Yes. All right. Well, we are winding down, and I think we had a good discussion.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. See you in the funny pages.
All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, guys.